Today is a very special episode of this podcast. Not because I have a special guest or I've got something magical lined up for you with secret strategies for fat loss or anything like that. It's just a special episode for me personally because it's testament to the hard work that I've put into this podcast over the years. And my strongest and only why as to why I was doing this podcast is to help and serve you on your health and fat loss expedition. And I want to use this episode as an example to prove to you and to show you that with hard work, anything is possible. With hard work and determination and persistence, you too can achieve any single goal that you are working on. On that note, welcome to this episode of the Mandy Meyer podcast, episode number 300. And yes, that is the special thing about this episode number 300. For those of you watching on YouTube, of course, you don't have 300 episodes in video format, as that's something that I just started recently. For those of you listening on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, you will see that this is episode number 300. For anyone watching on video, you'll be able to see the big smile that I have on my face. I'm actually getting goosebumps as I say that number. When I first started researching podcasting and how to start a podcast, there were so many stats stacked against me being successful within the podcast sphere. And not only me, but anyone that wanted to get into podcasting. The stats mention something like someone who does 20 episodes of a podcast will be in the top 5% of podcasters in the world, purely because so many podcasters don't make it past episode 5, 10, or 20. And here we are sitting today on fucking episode 300. As I said, when I started out, I had no idea what I was creating. I was scared that I was going to fail. I was scared that I was going to fail. I was scared that no one was even going to listen to the podcast. But I stepped out of my comfort zone and I launched the podcast just over 3 years ago. And that is just one of the interesting stats. The other interesting stat is that there's about 500,000 downloads on this podcast. And it's listened to in 169 countries around the world. And for that, I will be forever grateful. The reason for that is because I know that it's you, the listeners, that show up on a weekly basis to listen to this podcast, to share this podcast, to rate and review this podcast, and of course, to learn from this podcast. None of those stats would have been possible without you. So thank you very much for that. But in saying that, and like I always say to every single member in my private coaching community, is that you, the person doing the work, needs to acknowledge your wins and your victories. You need to acknowledge that it's your hard work that has taken you to achieve those goals. And in this moment, that is what I am acknowledging. This podcast has allowed me the platform to help hundreds and thousands of you, of other people out there on their health and fat loss expedition. This platform has also helped me promote my private coaching community along with my digital fat loss courses and my recipe book that I currently have. All the links are in the description for you to check out. And none of that would have been possible without hard work. So what is the main message of this episode of this podcast? It is that with hard work, determination, persistence, and you never giving up, you can indeed achieve and reach your goals. You just have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone. You have to be willing to face that fear of failure. You have to prove to yourself that you are not going to fail this time around. And as much as I mentioned the stats of this podcast, that's not actually what it is about. Those stats are just nice to have. They're pretty cool to look at. So here are 10 things that I have learned over the last 3 years, over the last 300 episodes of making this podcast. And these 10 things can play a massive role within your health and fat loss expedition. These 10 things can help you achieve your goals. And that's also why I always say, don't be in such a rush to get to your end goal, which is a number on the scale. Always take a moment to identify what you're learning on the process, on the journey, on the expedition to getting to that end goal. Number one, you have to start. So please just stop waiting for the right time, for the perfect time. Stop worrying about stats that say 95% of diets fail. Stop letting your fear of failure get in the way of you starting. Just start and tweak the plan as you proceed and never ever give up. Number 2, show up even when you don't feel like doing so. There have been days and weeks where I have been exhausted. And that's just me being very open and honest with you guys. So exhausted, so tired. But I know how important it is for me to show up for myself, for this podcast, for you. And even on those days where I've been tired, I have been there planning, recording, editing, and uploading this podcast or the episodes of this podcast. Because why? Because number 3, consistency is key. No matter what you are working on, no matter what goals you are working on, your consistency is going to play a fundamental part, a fundamental role in you achieving your goals. Number 4, it's going to be difficult when you start. It's going to feel chaotic when you start because you probably will have no idea what you're doing. When I first started this podcast, I had no cooking clue what I was doing. But the more I showed up, the more I practiced, the more podcast episodes I recorded, edited, and uploaded, the better I became at it, so the easier it seemed. And that's the same with you on your health and fat loss expedition. Difficult in the beginning, but the more you practice these things, the more you execute your daily non-negotiables, the better you become at them. Number 5, don't give up when the stats are shit. When that number on the scale fluctuates, you cannot be giving up. It's the same as me. There's some episodes of this podcast that have thousands of downloads. And then there are some episodes of this podcast where the downloads are dismal. But I don't let those dismal stats get in the way of me moving forward with creating the next episode. You absolutely cannot give up every single time there is a weight fluctuation. You cannot give up every single little time you feel like there is no change in your body composition. Number 6, hard work pays off. It is as simple as that. Either you're going to have excuses as to why you can't do the hard work, or, my friend, you are going to graft and do the hard work that needs to be done to get the results that you really want to get. You cannot be complaining about the lack of results if you're not putting in the hard work. Simple as that. End of story. Number 7, it can bring about so many other great things that are not body composition related. You working on creating a healthier lifestyle, creating healthier habits, can positively flow over into all other areas of your life, your work, your relationship, your social circle, your levels of productivity, your levels of energy. And it can create amazing other benefits in all areas of your life when that was something that you never even expected. Like I mentioned, this podcast has opened many doors for myself. It allowed me the opportunity to create a podcast with one of South Africa's top radio stations. It's allowed me the platform to speak about my health and fat loss digital courses, private coaching community, and my digital recipe book, which again, link in the description. Not only that, but it's also boosted my confidence in so many areas, in front of the camera, behind the microphone. And it's really helped me believe in myself a lot more than what I used to. So when you start out on working on a certain goal like your health and fat loss expedition, don't be so narrow-minded by focusing only on that number on the scale that you actually forget to focus on all the other amazing changes and opportunities that are coming your way from making those changes. Number 9, it's not going to be easy. There have been so many times where I have wanted to give up, where I've wanted to skip a week or two of making an episode for the podcast. And if I'm very open and transparent with you, a lot of those thoughts have been stemming from the fact that I have no financial gain from this podcast, from any of the episodes that I do. And to create an episode of this podcast, realistically, I'm looking at a minimum of 4 hours on any given day. So when I do the maths in my head, I'm like, what is the return of investment on the work that I'm doing? And then sometimes that little negative voice says to me, it's zero, Mandy, it's 0 rand. You are not making a cent. And that is where I need to take a step back and remind myself of why I started this podcast, what my main reason was, what my main why was, and that is to help people. People that have no idea how to move forward on their health and fat loss expedition. And the moment I remind myself of that, that gives me the drive and the motivation to record the next episode of the podcast. And that's the same with you on your health and fat loss expedition. There are going to be days where you are going to want to quit. There are going to be days where you are not motivated. My friends, those are the days where you need to take a step back and remind yourself as to why you started working on creating a healthier lifestyle in the first place. Number 9, your potential is unlimited. You are far more capable than what you give yourself credit for. You have so much potential to achieve all your goals. You just have to be willing to start with a plan that, number 10, is not perfect. Because why? Because it's not going to be perfect. When I first started this podcast, as I mentioned, I had no idea what I was doing. I had such a small, silly little mic and I was just speaking into it. And it worked. Because why? Because I was just getting the message out there, and that's what people wanted. They didn't want perfect. And my friends, your health and fat loss goals don't want perfect. Your health and fat loss goals want consistency. And you cannot create that consistency if you are delaying the starting of your plan because you are waiting for the perfect time, or because you are waiting to execute it in the perfect manner. Again, from my side, thank you so much to every single one of you guys who take the time out of your busy schedule on a weekly basis to listen to what I say. Thank you to every single one of you who have rated, reviewed, and shared this podcast. I really appreciate it. If you are listening on Spotify or iTunes, please feel free to drop this podcast a 5-star rating or a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please share it with a friend so that we can get the word out there even more. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I don't think you guys understand how much I appreciate every single one of you. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you like I usually do. Keep smiling, keep laughing, and keep being kind to one another. Much love, your friend who now has 300 episodes of a podcast, Mandy.